Forget the clean, orderly medical stations you've seen in documentaries. In Italy, 1943 into 1944, the front moved over mountains, through rain, and into shattered villages. Dressings ran out. Morphine wasn't always on the truck. Evacuation routes broke under shellfire and mud. Regulations were clear. Don't reuse, don't improvise, don't touch enemy supplies. Then the first wave of wounded arrived, and the rules became paperwork. These are the 7 banned World War II field medic tricks Free French forces used in Italy. Number 7. Re-sterilization of bandages. When reuse defied contamination fears. Army medical doctrine in 1943 treated dressings as single-use. Field sanitation manuals emphasized sterile, sealed gauze, and warned that reused bandages were a direct path to infection, especially in dirty wounds packed with cloth fibers, soil, and metal fragments. The expectation was simple. You dress, you discard, you resupply. Italy didn't always give you that option. Free French medical orderlies working up the chain behind the Moroccan and Algerian infantry gaumiers and tirailleurs sometimes faced days where the flow of wounded beat the flow of supplies. So they boiled cloth. They steamed bandages over cook fires. They dried them on lines or over warm engine covers when vehicles were available. And if proper gauze was gone, they cut up shirts, shelter habs, and anything clean enough to gamble on. Sometimes it worked. A re-sterilized wrap stopped bleeding and bought a man time until he reached a surgical team. Sometimes it backfired. In the Italian winter, damp reused dressings could turn into a breeding ground, and infections that might have been contained became amputations or deaths days later. Number 6. Captured German morphine use. Enemy supplies saving Allied lives. Allied medical supply systems were built around controlled drugs. Morphine syrettes and ampules were accounted for, issued through channels, and on paper enemy medical stores were suspect. Unknown concentration, questionable handling, and clear legal and disciplinary risk if something went wrong. In the Italian campaign, Free French stretcher bearers and aid post staff sometimes didn't have time for that. Captured German or Italian medical satchels turned up in abandoned positions, field dressing stations, and pillaged depots. If a casualty was in shock, screaming, or trying to rip his own dressings off, a medic could make a cold calculation. Relieve pain now, sort out paperwork later. They used what they could identify, marked ampules, labeled syringes, and relied on experience and caution because there was no lab, no pharmacist, and often no replacement. There were successes. A dose from captured stock could stabilize a man long enough for evacuation to a clearing station. But failures were possible. Wrong strength, contaminated equipment, or simple misreading under fire could mean respiratory collapse and attempt to save a life turning into a quiet, preventable death. Number 5. Improvised tourniquets and splints. Weapons turned into lifesavers. Tourniquets and splints weren't supposed to be casual improvisations. Field manuals warned that careless tourniquets could destroy limbs, and splints had to immobilize without cutting off circulation. The correct answer was issued medical gear, applied by trained hands, then rapid evacuation. On the slopes and ravines of Italy, evacuation wasn't rapid. So medics and riflemen built fixes from what they had. Web belts and rifle slings became tourniquets. A bayonet scabbard or a rifle cleaning rod could serve as a windlass. For splints, they used rifle stocks, tent poles, and sections of wooden crate, padded with socks or torn fabric. The point wasn't elegance. It was stopping arterial bleed out and preventing bone ends from grinding through skin while men were dragged down to a track a jeep could reach. One of these rigs could absolutely save a life, especially in ephemeral bleed where minutes matter. But it could also cost a limb. Too tight, too long, no recorded time, and the tourniquet did its job perfectly. It killed the tissue. If you were the medic, would you risk the leg to keep the man alive? Number 4. Shelter conversion for casualty evacuation. Tents and tarps turned into rescue tools. Evacuation doctrine assumed equipment, proper litters, organized relay points, and marked routes to battalion aid stations and collecting posts. It also assumed terrain you could actually carry a stretcher across without dumping the casualty into rocks. Italy punished those assumptions. In mountain country, with mule trails, shell holes, and flooded gullies, litter teams improvised. Shelter halves, tarps, and blankets became drag sheets. Men threaded rifle slings or web straps through corners to make handholds. Sometimes they lashed poles anything straight into makeshift frames. The goal was friction, not comfort. Keep a wounded man moving when you don't have 4 fresh bearers and you can't stand upright without drawing fire. It succeeded when speed mattered more than stability, getting someone out of a beaten zone and into cover. It also carried risk. Dragging could reopen wounds, grind fractures, and soak dressings with mud. A shortcut off a ridge might save minutes and cost a life in shock. Before we move on, if you're the medic and you've got 1 casualty, 1 muddy slope, and no proper litter, do you drag fast or carry slow? Tell us your call below. Subscribe if you want the unglamorous, documentable truth behind the gear and the rules. Number 3. Makeshift plasma warming kits. Cold fluid, cold or shock. Plasma doctrine was fussy for a reason. Bottles were supposed to be stored and handled to keep seals intact, avoid contamination, and prevent hemolysis. Warming, when allowed, was controlled water baths at safe temperatures, not a bottle shoved into whatever heat source was nearby. Italy didn't give you a lab bench. A medic might be trying to start an infusion with fingers that can't feel the tubing, while the casualty's skin goes gray and clammy. Cold plasma straight from a truck bed could worsen shivering and stress a man already slipping into shock. So they improvised. Bottles tucked under a jacket. Plasma rested near an engine block. A canteen cup of warm water used as a quick bath, rotated and watched like a meal you can't afford to burn. When it went right, the line ran smoother and the casualty stopped shaking long enough to be moved. When it went wrong, heat damaged the blood product or cracked a seal, and you traded shock for fever, chills, or an infusion that had to be stopped at the worst possible time. Number 2. Syringe and needle recycling. Sterile on paper, reused in mud. Officially, syringes and needles were controlled, inspected, and kept sterile. Reuse wasn't just frowned on, it was a direct route to infection and disease transmission. Doctrine assumed you had enough sets, enough alcohol swabs, enough boiling equipment, and enough time to do things the slow way. In an aid post that was taking casualties faster than it could clear them, those assumptions collapsed. Glass syringes could be rinsed and boiled. Needles could be passed through flame, wiped with whatever antiseptic was left, and used again because the alternative was no injection at all, no morphine, no plasma start, no local anesthetic for a quick, brutal procedure. Sometimes the sterilizer was a mess tin. Sometimes it was a pot borrowed from a field kitchen with someone watching the door for incoming shelling. It could work in the narrow sense that mattered that hour. The drug got in, the vein stayed open, the man stayed quiet enough to move. It could also backfire days later: abscesses, septicemia, hepatitis, and invisible death that arrived long after the firefight ended. Number 1. Sulfa powder from captured enemy stocks. A banned shortcut against infection. Sulfonamides were standard, but controlled. Allied practice emphasized known dosage, proper packaging, and approved distribution. Enemy medical stores were officially off limits for treatment: wrong labeling, unknown purity, and the simple fact that you couldn't certify what you were putting into a wound. Then reality hit. Italy's wounds were filthy. Shrapnel carried cloth and soil deep into tissue, and evacuation could take hours. Free French medics used sulfa powder as a first-line hedge against infection, sprinkled directly into wounds before dressing. And when their own packets ran out, captured German or Italian tins and sachets looked like the same lifeline: white powder, recognizable labels, and a familiar purpose. They made quick judgments: smell, texture, markings, and whether the container looked compromised. Used early, it sometimes bought time, slowing bacterial growth until surgery. But it wasn't magic. Wrong substance, contaminated stock, or heavy-handed application could irritate tissue and complicate later cleaning, and the medic might never know which choice tipped a wound toward healing or toward gangrene. What ties these tricks together isn't bravado. It's triage under scarcity. Doctrine tries to make medicine repeatable, inspectable, safe. Combat makes it intermittent, rushed, and personal: one set of hands betting on the least worst option. If you want World War II history without simplification, patriotic mythology, or documentary cliches, subscribe to Brass and Blitz. We'll keep following the gear, the paperwork, and the human decisions that never fit neatly into regulations.